The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Seeking the truth never gets old, even when it hides in the shadows. Immerse yourself in the world of June's Journey, a free-to-play hidden object game set in the roaring 20s. Solve the mystery of the devious gossip spreader and celebrate our 7th anniversary with exclusive events, never-before-seen decorations, thrilling mysteries, and exciting giveaways. The adventure and the gossip awaits. Are you ready for the journey? Download June's Journey today for free on Android or iOS.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and today is such a special episode for me, and I hope for you also. Today we're going to be talking about a figure from Canadian history, from Dene history, Indigenous history of North America, named Thanadelthur, who I had heard about. Just, I spent a lot of time looking up who are some women from history, and as a podcast host based in Saskatchewan and Canada, I've long wanted to find somebody where there's enough information and it's, a story that's got enough twists and turns that we can do an hour-long podcast about her. And Thanadelthur was someone I'd always wanted to learn more about. And then I happened upon, just in my regular searching for things, I found a paper that was written by today's guest, Rosalie Tsannie-Burseth, about Thanadelthur. And it really had the level of information that I needed to be able to be confident that this can be an episode of the podcast. I'm going to tell you a little bit of Canadian history just to sort of get everybody, because there's a lot of people listening who are not in Canada and you don't know the history of what led to the situation we're going to be looking at so effectively. So for much of the 17th century, there were French colonists in what we now call Canada, and there were English colonists, and for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years before then, there were lots and lots and lots of Indigenous people. And so Northern Canada, what we would now call Northern Canada, was one of the, in terms of the European colonization of North America, it's kind of one of the last places where that happened, just because it's one of the more challenging places to live if you don't know how to live in that sort of climate and that sort of temperature. And so what ended up happening is that a company, like literally a company, the Hudson's Bay Company, which is where the current company you might have heard of now, the Bay in Canada. This is where they got their start, as the Hudson's Bay Company. And so what this was is that during the reign of Charles II, they got funding to come and explore around Northern Canada to find for hunting reasons, for fur trade reasons. The history of much of Canada, what we now call Canada, is fur trade based. Whereas in Central America, Mexico, South America, a lot of it was it was Spanish and Portuguese and Dutch people looking for gold. In what we now call the United States, the colonization was a mixture of people, corn and tobacco plantations, and then also mixed with some English people who were religious refugees. North of there, it's fur trade based because there's a lot of furry animals here because it gets cold. So the Hudson's Bay Company established various trading posts, and so they were working with the nearby Indigenous people who traditionally had been doing hunting, and so that was who they sort of contracted out to do a lot of the hunting to get the furs that they would then trade. And so the people who we're going to be looking at specifically in this story, so there's the Cree people living in this. The setting of the story is what would now be Northern Manitoba in Canada. Look that up on a map if you're not sure where that is. So there's the Dene people and there's the Cree people. And the Hudson's Bay Company was mostly working with the Cree. And Rosalie is going to explain sort of the setting of the intertribal conflicts between the Cree and the Dene. But this is part of what had happened is because of the Cree trading with the Hudson's Bay Company, they had things like muskets. They had some other tools and things that the Dene did not have because they were not involved in this trade. And so just kind of setting the scene of what's going on. I know Canadian history is not well known to people outside of Canada, so just sort of setting the scene. Rosalie, today's guest, is such an incredible storyteller. She's going to walk us through the story in Thanadelthur and how remarkable she really is. And I'm so excited for you to hear today's episode with very special guest, Rosalie Tsannie-Burseth, who I just want to mention also. She is a member of the Hatchet Lake Dënesúłiné First Nation in Treaty 10 territory. Treaty 10 Canada, what we call Canada. There's a variety of treaties that were made between the British and the various Indigenous groups. Treaty 10 territory comprises much of Northern Saskatchewan and Northern Manitoba. So I'm based in Saskatoon, and this is the first Saskatchewan-based guest I've had on the podcast, and I'm so excited for you to hear this interview and to hear the storytelling of Rosalie Tsannie-Burseth. Okay, so today I'm joined by Rosalie Tsannie-Burseth, and we're talking about Thanadelthur. And I think you've explained to me, I think you are the expert on this story. So I'm so glad to have you here to join me, Rosalie. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. One of my favorite topics as a young girl is about her, Thanadelthur. By all means, I'm not the expert. I've researched her in many forms, in many ways. However, the elders hold that expert in their oral stories. So I'm just one of the humble people who've picked it up along the way because I really feel it's important for our young generation.
Well, and especially we're going to talk all about her, but she was a very young person herself. So I think to show the strength and the power of a young woman, she's such an example of that.
Oh, that's for sure.
So my first question for you, just to set the scene for everybody. So we're talking about 1715, around then. And so what was the relationship at that time between the Dene, the Cree, the Inuit, and the Hudson's Bay Company at that time?
Okay, well, her story began in 1713. However, the relationship between the First Nations people, as we call them now, the Cree, the Dene, and the Inuit to the north, the Dene kind of in the middle, and the Cree in the south. So there were tribal wars at one time, even with the Dene as well, and the Inuit and the Cree. And it's all for territorial wars, right? Intertribal territorial wars, and also vying to trade with Hudson Bay. So people were fighting, pushing each other out of the way. The Dene were more or less sandwiched in the middle. The Cree the Inuit to the north and the Cree to the south.
And so Thanadelthur, she's from the Dene people. Can you explain the various names? We just said before we started recording, you said there's various names that she was known by.
different people from different regions have a say about her. The Dene people in different regions want to take ownership of her. However, just based on the research and the land, the locations and coordinates took me to near the shores of Hudson Bay North and west of that. So we call her, well, first of all, the elders, my father called her Dënesúłiné, which means our grandmother. Elders say it is because of her the Dene are still around today. So we go with Thanadelthur, which is drops of sand. Some say Thanadelthur, something to do with the marten, the animal. There's different names. The slave woman peacemaker. She became to be known as a slave woman because she was abducted, right? So those are the different names that people have of her in the north, I think, towards Northwest Territories. Based on some of the books that I've read, they did call her the slave woman. The woman in red is also what she's called. So she comes with a lot of names.
Can you explain to everyone where you've been able to learn about her from? There's the journals from the HBC, but then there's also the oral storytelling, right?
Yes, I began to hear about her when I was quite young, 5 or 6 years old. My late parents and my grandparents talked about her, told stories about her. And it's been in the oral history for I think 307 years now. And that's where I began to hear about her. And years later, I didn't think I learned about it in high school, but when I started university, then I really began to learn about her through the books. But it's really limited. And through the years, I've been learning a lot about her, Googling her, collecting stories about her. So first of all, through oral history, and then through the university books, any books that I can get my hand on about her.
And that's where I really appreciate you coming on the podcast because I've been trying to learn about her as well myself, and it's limited in terms of what I was able to find. So much of it can be learned from the HBC records, but when I came across your writing about the oral histories, that really answered so many questions I had to understand more about who she was and what her life was like.
In the archives, there's a lot because the company men had to write journals, right? They talked about her. They, like you and I, people writing in diaries, and that's what they did. So I always felt that the oral component was never there. So I wrote that article to combine both. Hey, there's more than just the archives. There's the rich oral history. And the oral history is just so unique. It's told in a way that sometimes it's comical, sometimes it just kind of makes a young child listening to an elder. The mind just starts to race, and how when elders tell their stories are animated, they set the picture for you, and you just develop that in your mind, and it's just so unique. And that's why I wanted to. I tell a lot of stories about her too. I'm going to go forward and write a book in my words about her. And I think it's something that a lot of people, we need to instill in the minds of Canadians as well, like who she was, because she's not really known.
That's why I was so happy to find you writing about it. I'm excited to hear you're going to write a book because I do think her story is so important to the history of the Dene, but also to the history of Canadian history. It's a story more people should know about.
That's for sure.
So if we're looking at what we know about her, so the story that I've encountered really begins when, as a young girl, she was captured by the Cree. Can you explain how that happened or what you know about why she was captured?
As I said earlier, they had intertribal wars, and what they would do when they would raid camps. When the Dene people raided, for instance, a Cree or Inuit camp, there was no mercy. They just totally wiped out the whole encampment. For the Cree, they would do similar, but they abducted young girls, especially if they were pleasing to the eye. So you can tell this young woman was beautiful. So she was captured in 1713 up around Hudson Bay area, a little to northwest, called Chesterfield Inlet. In that area, now it's called Arviat, on the shores of Hudson Bay. So at the time, what was happening, as most Dene families would do, they were hunting. They were on a hunting party. So she was believed to be about 13 or 14 years old when this abduction happened. So since she was abducted, she was held in captivity for about a year. So just up hunting, doing their usual thing, and then this happened.
And she wasn't, there were other people were captured at the same time. There was at least one other young woman who was there as well, right?
Yes, so I believe the way she said it was her cousin and a friend as well. So two at the time that I know of.
And what do you know about that year or so that she spent in captivity?
That part is not really documented. From the books of the Hudson Bay Archives is when she came to York's factory. But I know, according to James Houston's book, who really studied the archives of the Hudson Bay and formulated a mental snapshot of what her life was like. Any life as a slave is 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 not usually good. Both her friend and her cousin were sexually abused, physically abused, and they were just there to work very hard, looking after the tent that they lived in. They did a lot of physical work. They did a lot of fishing and hunting and gathering. They also made snowshoes. The Dene women and Cree women Inuit are really, really good at making warm clothing made out of animal fur. So their roles were to do that. And how he managed to keep them was to tie the girls to his feet. So when they tried to escape, he would know long enough of a rope or twine that he had for them to go outside and relieve themselves. But not very good. They're hungry. Worked very, very hard.
And you just mentioned as well, this is kind of, she was first, when she was discovered by the HBC people, was she had escaped from the Cree and then she lived on her, not on her own. I guess her friend is with her for most of it, but just in the wild for a very long time. Was it one year that she lived after the escape?
She lived about a year after that, but they know the land, they know the way of the animal, they know just very in tune with their landscape and the environment and their Dene land. They have the capability to survive in that environment. But it was about a year that they were held in captivity. I think almost a year, and then they escaped.
Do you know anything about how they escaped, or we can just imagine she was clever, she found a way?
She knew that she wanted to escape for quite a while, and they were planning that. But again, this is where the two versions were. According to the archives, their capture was at a tribal meeting, and that's when they finally escaped. According to the Dene oral history, their version of it was when the captor and the Cree were going to Hudson Bay to trade. She snuck behind them and was following them along, and she looked into what she said, which is what we call Churchill today, or a stone house. They looked in and they saw some strange people, which is their first encounter of white people. And but I'm going to be talking about this part a little later. Her first experience with the Europeans. So yeah, it took about a year for them to formulate their escape. So and just to live in that environment, they were hungry all the time. They were near starving. They actually most likely went through the ice a few times. And I think this would have been maybe in the cold of winter towards the spring, because it was in the spring when they stumbled upon the goose hunters at 10 Shillings near the Nelson River. her friend perished along the way, just succumbed to their starvation. So she was near death as well.
And so it was at this point where she was near death that she first encountered. It was people goose hunting for the HBC. Were those white men or those were Indigenous hunters?
They were both. They were Europeans. I think Totine or Bonlai. They used the word Bonlai in Dene means French. At the time, too, the French and the English people were fighting as well. So at the time when this happened, it was the English people that were at the fort when she came upon them, and with the Cree hunters, and she, like I said earlier, she was starving. Her clothing was really in rough shape, and someone noticed. They thought maybe it was an animal, or then they realized it was a human. So they picked her up and they took her to York Factory now, York Fort, as we know today. And they faced a lot of dangers, rivers and lots of storms, and trying to survive in the elements of northern Canada.
I keep thinking about that too, just the northern Canada in the winter and even in the spring, just the weather and everything and what a challenge that would be to someone in her situation who is starving, whose her clothes are falling apart. So it's such luck that she was found when she was, and then the people who found her took her in to help her.
Yeah, but like in today's age, I'm a hunter. I hunt caribou, and we've hunted in the dead cold of winter. And for me, when I'm out on the hunting trail, I often think about her. They had no snowmobiles, they had no toboggans, they had no dogs at the time. And how did she ever survive the elements? Because it is cold out there. You really have to know the land. You really have to know the wind. You have to know all aspects of elements to survive. And keep in mind that they weren't wearing clothes like you and I wear today. They were made from animal furs that they used.
That's part of where I just there's so much remarkable about her story, but just the knowledge, like you just said, that she would have had to know about the land and the wind just to survive through those months on her own, largely, without the sorts of winter clothes we would have right now or electricity or, yeah.
And when I think about her, when she lost her family, of course, in the raid, and being held captive, and her friend who perished with her, and the little ceremony she did for her, and how she felt. But it's the will that she had within her that she had to survive. It's just a tremendous, awesome story.
So we've reached the point now. So she's been found. She's been saved, really. She's been rescued by people who are able to take her to a structure where she can be indoors, she can be fed. And so this is her first interaction with the Europeans.
Well, everything was strange for her. Keep in mind, she knew Cree already, right? She couldn't had they had to understand Cree. So when she was taken into your fort, Governor James Knight, she was presented to him and was trying to figure out who she was, because she was in a real state at the time. She was starving and she wasn't properly clothed, and when she spoke in Cree and also in Dene. So the first thing, the way we know Hudson Bay is, oh, good, she's going to be an asset for me. So we're going to bring her back to life, and we're going to we're going to make good use of her. But she was a feisty little woman, 5 foot nothing. She could stand up to any now, and to figure this out. 300 years ago, it was a man's world. And for her to rise above that, to stand against any man, a young woman who's 5 foot nothing. I mean, just imagine that. When she got to the fort there, they kind of cleaned her up and told stories. And James Knight was more interested in her stories because she talked about gold and copper on her land. So all these tales that he was interested in. And And this is where she began to formulate the idea, my people can have access to this, the Dene people. So, and then going back to the question about first contact between the French and the English, they were both fighting for the trading territory as well, and they were in competition in Hudson Bay too. And at the time that she came upon Hudson Bay with the English, the French were more or less told to leave at the time. So, and according to my father, I never get tired of my parents telling me the story of her first contact with Europeans, more or less white people. She was so astonished because she said when they were looking, so either James Knight or William Stewart, one of them must have had blue eyes, because she said they almost scared her. It looked like there were eagles looking at me, and they were so deathly pale. I thought they lacked blood or they were really hungry. And so what she did was, because in her worldview at the time, her reality and her space, the Dene people had no guns or ammunition. So she was telling the governor, saying the Cree people are killing my people. You hear these loud icicles break and my people drop dead. She is describing the what do you call that gun? Musket gun. So the sound of the gunshot is what she was, and it was a whole new world for her. So the goal of the Hudson Bay James Knight was for her to learn English, because she spoke Cree already, and they had this plan for her to do this peace journey.
And so this part of what she saw there was the tools that the Europeans had that they had been sharing with the Cree. And she saw, oh, these could be helpful for the Dene.
Yeah, while she was in captivity, she noticed the Cree women were using pots and knives and utensils. And it seemed, well, when she saw that their lives were easier, and their captor also had these tools that they could use. And it was strange for them, but it was easier for them to work with. And what she also wanted for her people was peace, and also to live in peace and to make their lives easier. So, this is where I think easier from what, maybe from escaping or hiding all the time in intertribal wars. But her goal was to make their lives easier, to make it easier for the hunters, for the guns, and also for the Dene women. And that's all, she started formulating that when she was held in captivity, and she saw that at the Hudson Bay as well. So the Dene people had no guns. They used spears. They were made by wood and carved arrow heads to hunt. So the Cree talked about how they were deathly afraid of the Dene, and likewise the Dene to the Cree, because they had this magic thing that cracked and people died. However, when you think about it, a musket, you have to load it up, right? But the Cree people said, well, I better hurry up because I'll be dead in a minute, because the way they hunted, they were very powerful people and deadly accurate in their target with these spears. So I just thought it was such an interesting concept how they were in an element where they feared each other so much.
I really appreciate how you've described it, and what I've read about her is that she really wanted to better the life for all of her people. Even while she was in captivity, she was seeing these things and she thought, not just how can I escape, but how can I escape and bring this technology back? How can I help other people? I think that's very admirable too.
And then and when you said that, it's the will to live, to make sure at some point her people's lives are going to be easier.
Yeah, it's that sort of community, that sort of sense of selflessness. I find that so admirable. So she saw that there were these tools here. She's at she's at Fort York, York Factory with the HBC. They think, okay, if we teach her English, she can help us with these peace talks as a translator. And she does. She learns English. She's clearly very good at picking up languages.
And you read into the book that she's really feisty, right? Just a very determined young person, very smart, very smart.
So much about her is already so impressive. And she's such, like you said, she's 5 foot tall, this tiny person. At this point, she's what, 15, 16 years old?
Yes, about 15, between 15 and 16.
With such a strength of character. It's so impressive.
And she's nursed back to health by the company, and there's a Cree woman. She kind of looked after her and the governor. And this is the story that my late parents and elders told me was, okay, tell her to go find herself something, a cloth, so we can make garments for her. So she chose red because she thought, okay, red, it looks like blood, right? She said, when I start looking for my people, I'm going to say to them, I'm wearing red. I am Thanadelthur. I'm here looking for you. And she said, I want my people to see me from a long distance. You know that mirage you see on a cold day or on a hot day over the lake, and it looks like even the islands are lifting up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she explained that too. When I'm running across the big lake, I want them to see this blob of red going. And maybe they'll understand that it's me. But at the same time, I'm going to call out to them. And this is the part of the history that's not written down. And they were hard to find. And she was in Dene country, so she knew. And this is in between the wars, the intertribal wars. So the Dene were really in constant hiding.
Well, and this brings us to the peace mission. Once she had picked up some more English, then she was brought with them to try and find the Dene. Is that correct? To try and explain, to try and find peace so they could work together with the HBC. And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm. As someone who enjoys trying out different makeup looks but doesn't wear a ton on a daily basis, I like to focus on making sure I have high quality staples. And regardless of your makeup routine, you've probably seen Thrive Cosmetics Viral Tubing Mascara. I've certainly seen it everywhere. It's in that turquoise tube, and it's become my go-to for mascara because it doesn't clump or smudge, and it comes off really easily with just water. So that mascara, along with all of Thrive Cosmetics beauty products, are certified 100% vegan and cruelty-free. Their bestsellers have thousands of 5-star reviews, and it's easy to see why. Their products are great. I love a multi-purpose makeup product, and their brilliant eye brightener is perfect to use as eyeliner, eyeshadow, even highlighter. I'd recommend using shade Stella for that. They all have a shimmer, and Stella is this really pretty champagne color that looks great on a variety of skin tones. Something I also didn't know from all the mascara videos I saw is that for every product sold, Thrive Cosmetics donates either that same product, another product that's needed more, or a monetary donation towards 8 major causes, including those impacted by cancer, domestic abuse, and veteran and education organizations. So refresh your everyday look with Thrive Cosmetics. It's beauty that gives back. Right now, you can get an exclusive 20% off your first order at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/thrive for 20% off your first order.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who's ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
And we're back.
Yes, Governor James Knight delegated William Stewart to lead this expedition, but she just took over. And according to the archives, this is when the expedition was grueling. It's walking. They walked about 600 miles. So this piece of journey started early morning of June 27th, and it was almost a year when they came back, May 5th, 1716. But along the journey, they were faced with many challenges again: starvation, again, the elements, and the reluctance of the Cree to move any further when they knew they were in Dene territory. So as they were going along, and today it would be around the Mount. So when they came to that area, they came upon a camp of 9 Dene that were massacred, and William Stewart thought, and this is according to all the books that I've read, okay, this is the end of the peace journey. This is the end of it, because the group of Cree that were ahead massacred this camp, and she realized it was part of her family as well. So there was lots of fear at that time. So they thought, okay, this is the end. We're not going to go any further. So William Stewart was willing to turn back. And because the Cree said, we're not going anywhere. You will not talk us to go any further, because we're going to be killed for sure. So this is when this feisty little woman girl said, can you give me 10 days? Just 10 days. I'll go by myself, and I'm going to go find my people. By 10 days, I will be back. Did you hear that? I will be back. She didn't say I may be back, but they doubted her that this wasn't going to happen. So just give me that time. And she was so persuasive, and they agreed, and they relented and said, okay, we're going to give you 10 days. No more. After 10 days, we're leaving. We're heading south, because we're in territory that we're really uncomfortable with. So, and this is where the Dene oral history kicks in, because that part is not documented. Remember, she's journeying by herself. So, and she puts on her red garment, and she goes out, and she knows her area, because Dene people know the landscape. They know the stars, the cosmology. They know all that, the wind and the direction, and or navigation. They've done that for hundreds of years. So she knew the people in the area. And as she's going along, she had her garment on. She's by herself on snowshoes, just her. So she didn't stop and pitch her tent like we would today. She was totally on her own in the winter. And as she's going along, she said, if anybody can hear me, si Thanadelthur, can you hear me? I am Thanadelthur. I am looking for you. I have some gifts for you. It'll make your life easier if you could hear me, please. we're negotiating peace, so we don't have to live in fear. And she kept saying that over and over and over again. So at some point, someone heard them. And again, this is stories from the elders, heard them. And they said, we keep hearing this, someone calling out. It was two young men. There were runners to go ahead or to go back. Strong young men who were really fast. They would run ahead if they were sourcing out danger. So, and these two runners that came back to the camp and said, we keep hearing this woman and saying she's Thanadelthur, and we don't, she doesn't see us, but we've seen her, and she's calling out saying, I'm looking for my people. If you could hear me, what do we do? The elder said, oh my God, that's Thanadelthur. We lost her a few years ago and she's still alive. So this camp knew her as well. And so the young guys were instructed to go back where they may have heard her, because there would be a certain trail. I mean, trails aren't everywhere, and it's a certain trail that they travel. But mind you, at the time of war, you'd have to hide your tracks because you don't want other people to find your tracks, because they can source each other out, the Cree, the Dene, or the Inuit. So they were instructed, okay, go back, sit under a drift. So when the snow drifts, it's huge, right, in some areas. So they were told to sit there and wait for her. Do not say anything. So they did that, and they were waiting, and finally they heard her again. Thanadelthur, this is I am Thanadelthur. I'm looking for you. I have some stuff to make your lives easier. Please, don't be afraid. I'm here to help you. So as she got closer, these two young men just kind of jumped up in front of her because they were told who she was already. So, and it really frightened her because, you know, your own people don't jump up in front of you just out of nowhere. So she kind of fainted. And when she came to, she felt better. She told him what she was doing. I'm here looking for my people. I'm looking for peace. I'm looking to make your lives easier. I don't want no more people, my people dying. Can we live in peace? That's all I want. So they took her back to the camp. So because she's been walking by now maybe 5 days and calling out her people, she lost her voice, or it was really hoarse. And they asked, why is your voice hoarse? Well, because I've been calling to my people. I want my people to hear me. She was so happy beside herself that she was reunited with her family and friends. She just cried and said, you know, I'm here to help you. Please don't be afraid. Don't run. So they were afraid, of course. And she said, we have to make peace. We have to make peace with the Cree. So that was really uncomfortable for them because they're enemies, right? So she managed to talk them into going back with them. And she took back about 100 of her people. And it took about 5 days to walk back. So in the meantime, the camp with William Stewart and the Cree were getting a little impatient, especially the Cree. We have to get out of here. It's the 10th day she's not here. This is in the morning. They said, we're going to go. And then Stewart said, no, just hang on. We'll wait. Just give me a couple more hours. So, and then William, and according to the book, it says, I think he was in love with her. And some elders have said that as well, but I don't know where that story goes. So it was 10 days. And right at the very last minute, the Cree were beginning to sorry, I get this way every time I tell a story. At the very last minute, it's epic. Very last moment, lo and behold, over the hill she comes. And William Stewart said, I knew it. I trust her. I knew she was going to do this. So for me, it's a moment in history for the Dene, in history for Hudson Bay, in history for powerful woman in the world, that this young 5'0" brave girl brings her people.
Mm-hmm.
So with the timing of this legendary hero, she just made her appearance just like that, like in the movies, right?
I know. That's what I was thinking. She said 10 days, and they thought, oh, she's not coming. And then at the last minute, here she is. Yeah.
Here she is. And a few of the books, in our terrain up north, the trees are small. Down south, the trees are taller up north. So they knew, like camouflage, right? She said, well, you said you didn't bring your people. They're here with me. And she called out to them, can you guys come out of the trees? And they were so amazed. Out of the forest came these Dene people, because they know how to hide, right? And that's how she got her people there. And sure enough, the 10 days, 307 years ago or more, that determination, the will to live, the will for peace, the will, to create, what she did. It's just really astounding for me when I think about it, when the elders tell me. That's why I never get tired of hearing about her. And every time I talk about the epic moment, I get that way. So I have passion for it, yes.
Well, and I love that she's such a hero and her goal is peace, because often in many cultures, warriors are celebrated, people who are very successful at fighting. But she's a hero for peace. And this story just shows that those stories are just as impressive.
I love it when you said hero for peace.
So she's got everybody together, and then there's the actual peace talks. And what can you tell us about how that went?
Just based on the elders and based on the archives, it's a setup where they're going to do peace talks with the peace pipe. And she was really persuasive. She could overpower anyone just by her demeanor, whether it's her people or whether it's the Cree, whether it's William Stewart, and then the picture is that both groups are really afraid of each other, right? They fear each other, and there were tense moments. And what she does is they have this peace talk. They're sitting down. They have this peace pipe, and then she felt her people were not responding, so she just started to get a little angry. She started to berate her people, and she kept saying, "I want peace. I don't want any of you to die anymore." And this is a quote that I really like, and I'm just going to repeat it. Quote, "Do you want to live like hunted rabbits? Do you want the constant threat of war?" She was enraged and frustrated because no one was making the first move. She just wanted peace. Thanadelthur stamped her feet in disgust. Whirling around, she ran back, grabbed some women by their coats, and pulled them out of the trees into the clear. "Do you want war or peace?" she pleaded. "Do you want sharp knives and guns that mean your children will never go hungry again?" This is from book, so end of quote. So she really wanted that, and she made it clear that that was her mission. Because she lived with the Cree, she was held captive, she lived with them at the fort. The best thing for everyone was for peace, not only for commercialism, but for peace.
And she would have been probably the only person there who had lived in all three worlds and who knew all those languages. So she had a different perspective as well, I think.
Oh, she did. She knew the ways of her people. She knew the ways of the Cree, because she lived with them for about a year. And then she was at the fort as well. She learned the ways of the Europeans there as well. So she had the different perspectives of each group. And she took advantage of all that to her benefit and for her people.
And she must have seen also how she could imagine these groups working in peace. She would have seen what they had in common, how this could work. And that's maybe part of where her determination came from. She knew that this was possible.
Mm-hmm. And it was possible. She was going to make it work no matter what. Could have stood up to the Cree, and William Wallace stood up to William Stewart many times, and James Knight, I think he berated her once, but she still stood her ground.
And then what the end result of this was what she wanted. Like the peace talks were successful, right?
It was successful, yes. As well, the goal of Hudson Bay was, people are going to trade there without fearing for their lives. And the Hudson Bay, of course, commercialism, capitalism, they wanted all the furs traded at their fort, right?
And then this also, for her people, for the Dene, the having that relationship between them and the HBC, this would also mean income, and it would improve the way of life of them as well, right?
Yeah, for sure, yes. But then I made a statement earlier about from what, right? It was a way of life for thousands of years for them. So bringing her people out of that into commercialism, that's a beginning, the change of life for their lives for the Dene.
And so, with the success of this mission, and this is where the story gets sad, but because she does get sick. But what was her next mission going to be now that she had proven herself? There was plans for her to do more of this sort of work, wasn't there?
There was plans for her to go further. She did talk about gold and copper, right? She talked about that. So James Knight formulated thinking that, okay, we're going to create another expedition to go further north and west. So this would be towards the copper mine. So it was what she talked about. And Samuel Hearne, if you read his books, his third attempt, he finally got there. So that's like about 80 years later. So in between the talking and preparing for this expedition, the ship came in and she got sick. Something her body couldn't handle, whatever it was, European ailment of some kind, and her body just could not handle it. So she was sick for about 2 days, and it was a sad day at Fort York with James Knight and William Stewart when she passed away. It was February 5th, 1717.
I was just going to say, and they wrote about how devastated they were to lose her.
It's still in many quotes in many books. They were all devastated. Even on her sick bed, she took a young lad and taught him Dene and taught him Norton was the last name. And he was instrumental with Samuel Hearne as well to go further, to go on this expedition, what to expect, what to do on her deathbed. She wanted to make sure this was done. So he was so devastated that he wanted to, in her honor, build a fort in her name where her people can trade without fear. So this is the fort in the York factory up in Churchill. It's a museum now. I've been there, have seen it. So it's just awesome to think and look at that stone structure and how she was instrumental with that. And it was his gift in her name when she passed away that he promised that something would be built in her honor.
I really appreciate that. I love when people are commemorated in that way that is so appropriate for what their work was and for who they were. So just to commemorate her and her importance to the trade and to the peace with that structure.
So I've been to Churchill, Manitoba a few times. I've been to the fort. I've been in the community as well. So what I've done, it was in 2017, I think. I told a little bit about it. It was 300 years of her passing that I just wanted to find out who was commemorating her. So I called Churchill, Manitoba, and they said I should phone Parks Canada there, York Fort or factory. It said, so I dialed that number. It was December 18th, about 4:45, before I was going to go on Christmas holidays. So I phoned there, and I remember Mike was his name, picked up. He said, "Hi, my name is Mike. How are you?" And I had to talk faster, explain myself. I said, I've done a lot of research. I'm Dene from Northern Saskatchewan. I just want to make sure, find out what Churchill is doing to commemorate Thanadelthur for 30 years of her memory being there. And he said this, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I said, what? He said, just 10 minutes ago, we had a meeting here at Parks Canada thinking, I wonder if anybody out there, Dene, would be interested in being a part of 300-year celebration, or if there's even any interest. Exactly 10 minutes later, you call, he said. She was guiding me. So as a result, we planned the trip and we brought Dene people there. We had our drums. We're outfitted in red. And that happened in July. We even had a little the students did a skit on her. So when I was there in Churchill, there was a little monument or a cairn that's called it way out of the way. And I thought she shouldn't be out of the way in Churchill. She should be right in the middle. So, and there's one street that's named after her, Thanadelthur Way is what it's called. So I got to know the people there and the Saïzi Dene who were traditionally from that area, and we talked. And then I did, of course, said that she's way out there. I don't think she should be. I think we should bring her a little closer into town. So I have a really good relationship with Churchill. And a couple of years ago, they phoned me again to say, would you like to come to Churchill? We're going to rename our park. It's called Hudson Park, I think. Hudson Park. And we want to change it to a Thanadelthur. We still have that huge plaque when you came here, and we want to move it there. Would you like to come? Of course, I didn't say anything for a couple of minutes. I said I would love to. So they renamed that park after her. So she's right in the center of Churchill. Yes.
I love that she's being celebrated still today. And I love that you've been her champion in this.
There's just a few scholars as well who are working on her who are Dene, but we talk back and forth and build each other up. And if anyone phones me about, can you tell me about Thanadelthur? I say, of course. What do you want to know?
Like you did for me, very graciously.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you explain, in your opinion, her importance to the Dene people? Like you mentioned before, one of the ways she's known is as our grandmother. How is she seen within the Dene community?
They have Pocahontas, they have Cinderella, kind of that concept. Just, I don't know whether it should be a hero or it should be a legend. People kind of debate questions like that. But for us, we never really debate. In our minds, it's Thanadelthur. She's someone who just created a good life for us. So by doing that, we keep her memory alive in our oral storytelling because it's in the minds of me, and I pass it on to my children. I'm never quiet about her, and of course, elders, they're willing to talk. What we do February 5th to commemorate her is we wear red. We have storytelling. We take a day aside where we talk about her, and it's picking up momentum now. It wasn't really. I just feel now it's starting to happen, but we need to do a lot more.
Well, and I think how you've explained her importance as well throughout the story is she, by bringing the piece that really improved the quality of life for so many people, but then also introducing the tools, like that is what allowed the Dene people to stop just hiding and to find a new way to live so that the community and the culture could continue on.
Mm-hmm. The elders in many of the books that I've read, one elder, he's gone now, about Dënesúłiné, says, Thanadelthur, but da isindu. We live our lives now because she saved us.
This little tiny girl.
Yes, 5'0". They even described her.
Yeah.
What she looked like. There's no known picture. I was told, I'm still looking into it, that there may be a sketch of her in the Hudson Bay Archives in London, England.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
There's no photograph. So when they describe her, it's this 5 foot long black hair, doe-like eyes, high cheekbones, broad nose, full lips. So I've try to get young people to draw it for me. I just feel it's just not good. I'm still going to do that because there's a description of her. Yes. And beautiful.
Beautiful and smart and just resilient. The surviving like she did so many things, the being captured and then living on her own, everything. Yeah.
And then you're right, like the impact she had, and she died probably when she was between 16 or 17 in her short life, what she accomplished.
And that's where I think you mentioned, I forget if it was before I started recording or not, but just sharing her story with the young people. And I think showing here's a young person and look what she did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think I know how you're going to answer this question, but on a scale of 0 to 10, how significant do you think she was to history?
Okay. Why 10?
I
10
feel like,
plus.
exactly. I was going to say 10 plus. Yeah.
Yeah.
Higher
So
than 10.
very, very significant. She made history. She was a brave young woman, not only against Hudson Bay or the elements out on the land or the Cree. She was very brave. She just stood her ground. I mean, can you imagine 300 years ago and when men, still ruled, and she just kind of came out of the oral history and the books of Hudson Bay, just this feisty little lady who walks out of the realm of our history. Remarkable young woman who exhibited and earned prestige in her role as a negotiator. Very intelligent woman. She demonstrated knowledge of the land, spoke linguistic ability, she spoke different languages, and immense leadership skills by navigating this mission. She's a peacemaker. She was called a slave. We changed her to peacemaker now. She's a businesswoman, negotiator, Thanadelthur, Martin Shake, or she comes from the Martin clan. So, and we asked the question, why did she pick red? So look at it now in today, missing and murdered woman. It's red. you know, I always get goosebumps when I see that because that was happening. Missing and murdered women for many, many, many years. And she just, for whatever of her beauty and her skills, she was made to live.
I was thinking about that too when we first spoke and you mentioned her connection to the color red. And I thought, oh, yeah, the connection with the red dress for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and the fact that she was captured as well. Like this,
Mm-hmm. She was abducted.
Yeah, it's her story has so many connections to nowadays. So I love what you've said about how she's getting momentum, like the movement to commemorate her and to remember her, because I think it is so many parallels to today.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful story. And my next submission is I'd like to have her in the motion picture. I can see how it's going to start and see how it's going to end.
It would be such a great movie. Just even the way you told it, her appearing at the last minute on day 10 in her red coat. I mean, I can imagine the music swells and yeah.
Oh my God. I'd get choked up again. I honestly, and I always get choked up at that point. I do. It's such a passion for me, you know.
Do you have any final thoughts you want to share about her or her story?
I think regarding her story is that we continue to keep her character going. I know we will. I know we will. But I also believe that more people need to understand that there were people with immense leadership skills, a young woman 300 years ago. The story about Hudson Bay, the story about Canada, you know, people need to know that she contributed a lot into Canada, the beginning of Canada, and she needs to be appreciated. People need to appreciate stories like that. There's women. A young man from parts of Canada wrote me a letter saying I filled out this application. Let's get it going to have her name or her photo on a $10 bill, whatever, but there's no photo of her.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, I think something like that, just to commemorate and to celebrate as the peacemaker, I think is such a powerful thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it is very powerful. Every time I talk about it, I just feel more empowered.
I'm so honored that you came on my podcast to help share this story, because there's people who are going to listen to this there's listeners in Canada, but also all around the world. And so now a bunch more people are going to know about her story. And I could never have told it myself. I needed to bring you on to share the story. Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I'm so happy you found that article, but there'll be more.
And I'll keep an eye out for those as well. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Anne.
So I mentioned at the beginning that I'm so grateful that I just a search one day, I came across this paper that Rosalie wrote about Thanadelthur in, I think 2022, as part of her PhD program that she was on at that time. And so that paper itself, I was able to see it, and you can also, because it is available on the internet. You don't need to belong to a university to be able to read it, and the link to that is included in the show notes. In that paper, there's also many of Rosalie's references, which I'm also going to list in our show notes as well, because she's done so much research on this topic, and who better to explain further reading that other people can do about Thanadelthur, this remarkable woman who I'm so glad and happy to be able to share her story with everybody. Now, you probably noticed when I was doing the interview that at the end, I asked Rosalie for her to help out with scoring Thanadelthur. If we were going to, I got her to weigh in on the significance scale. For the women who we profile on this podcast, there's 4 different categories in which we score them on the scandaliciousness scale. And I just didn't get around to asking Rosalie for the other categories. So I'm going to grade them myself as I think the scores she might have given. So the first category that we score people on is scandaliciousness. How scandalous were they seen in their lifetime? How scandalous are they seen now? And I'm going to say a 0 for Thanadelthur. I think she was a stand-up, upright, admirable person. Nothing she did was seen as scandalous. Maybe even if people who thought like, oh, you're working to find peace, you're working with the HBC, you work like, even if people thought that was scandalous at the time, she talked them around to realizing that like, no, this is actually what's best for everyone. So I'm going to say a 0 for scandalous for her. For scheminess, which in the context of this podcast just means how smart, how clever, how resilient was this person. And I think this is a 10 out of 10 for Thanadelthur. I think her ability to survive in a variety of circumstances that she found herself in, like first being captured, being able to successfully escape, then being able to survive on her own in the cold in the wilderness, just really shows she had good instincts of what to do and when. And then her scheminess in a positive way really comes into play when she noticed the tools that the Cree had. She noticed the tools that were on the HBC and thinking about ways that could be to the benefit of her community. And I mean, everything, you just heard this episode, like the way the peace talks that she took over, like 10 out of 10. For scheminess, she knew what she was doing. She was so smart. Her significance, Rosalie gave her 10, if, more than 10 if possible. And then the final category on the scale for this podcast is the sexism bonus, which is where we look at how much more could this person have accomplished if not for sexism. And I think, like so many other people on this podcast, the sexism she faced is so interconnected with other things, like being from the Dene community, who were in constant conflict with the Cree, and then also the English were there too. There's so much. Men really ruled things, as Rosalie said a couple things in this episode, but she stood up to them and was respected. So that's sort of like sexism wasn't working against her there, but at the same time, she was captured and taken into seemingly sexual slavery, which is a young man might not have had that same situation. So I'm going to say for sexism bonus, I'm going to say 7. So this gives her an overall score of 27 out of 40, which we've talked about so many people on this podcast, but she's up there with so many remarkable people, and I'm just pleased to have her on this list at all as just a person who's been on this podcast. Again, you can probably tell I'm I'm so happy that I was able to get Rosalie on the podcast to tell this story because no one could have told it like her. And I'm really proud to be able to share the story with all of you so you can all learn a bit about this important, lesser known person from Canadian history. And so next week, there's going to be another episode also taking place on technically the North American continent. I guess I'll say, like last week, we were talking about Matoka, aka Pocahontas, who lived in what is now the United States. This week we're talking about Thanadelthur, who lived in what is now Canada. And next week we're going to be talking about people who lived in what was then and is still known as Mexico. So that's next week's episode. And just to remind you of all the things about this podcast and the vulgar history world and things you can be doing to further engage if that's what you want to do. So I do have a Substack newsletter that I've been doing every week. I'm posting an essay about, at the moment, we're looking at women from Tudor history in a series called Tudor, I Hardly Knew Her. And so we worked our way through all of the 6 wives of Henry VIII. At the moment, I'm looking at the Tudor matriarchs, Margaret Beaufort and Elizabeth Woodville. And next, I think I might do the sisters of Henry VIII, Margaret and Mary Tudor. So just, you can subscribe to that. It's at vulgarhistorysubstack.com. The link is in the notes, or that's where I am if you're on there. You can also support the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. So if you pay at least $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to all of the episodes, as well as ad-free access to all previous episodes. If you pledge at least $5 or more a month, you get bonus episodes as well. So that's where we look at things like vulgar piece theater, where I talk about costume dramas with Alison Epstein and Lana Wood Johnson. The most recent one we're doing, I don't think it's come out yet. We did Brotherhood of the Wolf, which in terms of representation of Indigenous characters, that's a whole conversation to be had about that film. The next one is The Road to Wellville, which I think should be coming out shortly at the time you're hearing this. I also have various other bonus episodes on there, the after show and some other things. If you want to listen to just specific of the Patreon exclusive episodes, you can just buy one episode instead of having to become a Patreon member. Although, and I know people are doing this, and I just want to let you know, like, I support you in this. You can always join the Patreon for a month, listen to what you want, and then leave. Like, totally fine. You can also get a free trial, listen to what you want, and then leave. Whatever you want to do. I don't think any sort of way if you come and go from the Patreon, just kind of like get what you like when you want it, because I know finances for everybody are whatever these days. I do want to also mention our brand partner, Common Era Jewelry, which is a women-owned business it's a small business that's making beautiful jewelry inspired by women from history, people like Cleopatra, Agrippina, Anne Boleyn, as well as mythological figures like Medusa and Aphrodite. And so these pieces are beautiful. A few weeks ago, we had the episode about Hatchet. I couldn't help myself. I got the Hatchet necklace because I was just so moved by her story, and I wanted to support Tori, which is the name of the owner of Common Era Jewelry. Anyway, if you want to pick up some pieces from them, they have pieces available in solid gold as well as in more affordable gold vermeil. They also have like scrunchies, hair bows, like lots of things with a really cute historical sort of context. Vulgar History listeners can always get 15% off all items from Common Era by going to commonera.com/vulgar or using code vulgar at checkout. You can also find merch for this podcast at vulgarhistory.com/store. That's the best for the US. If you're outside the US, you can get some better shipping if you shop at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. You can get in touch with me using the form at vulgarhistory.com, or you can email me directly at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com and keep up with me. I'm on Instagram at vulgarhistorypod. At the moment, every week there's this new show on Stars in Canada and the US. It already aired in the UK, but it's just here now. And there's one episode a week called Mary and George. And it takes place during the reign of King James I/6. It's about his favorite, George Villiers. Some past people from the podcast who we've talked about on the podcast are in the show. Frances Howard is on the scene. Anne of Denmark is there. And I'm mentioning this in the context of Instagram because when you join my Patreon at the $5 or more per month level, then you can be added to my close friends on Instagram. And that's where I'm live blogging my reactions to the show, which are entirely favorable at the moment. Transcripts of recent episodes are available at vulgarhistory.com. Thank you to Aveline Malik for providing these transcripts. And until next time, everyone, until next week, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Anne Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Talmor, Sheshin Morachi. Talmor is my home. My family have worked the land for generations. My gran says the island does not belong to us, but we belong to the island. And we must be ready, for a great evil is coming, and death follows with it.
Listen and subscribe to the latest season of Undertow, The Heroine, a Storyglass production presented by Realm, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Nowadays, trends and news cycles change faster than we can blink. But there are some things that withstand the test of time. And if you're looking for a connection to something timeless, and maybe also a glimpse of life at a slower pace, I believe everyone can relate to the very human experiences explored in Jane Austen's novels. And that's where I come in. My name is Alison Larkin. I'm a writer, comedian, and narrator and host of the Jane Austen podcast with Alison Larkin. I spent a lot of my childhood in the part of England where Jane Austen lived and wrote, and now that I live in the States, nothing gives me a sense of homecoming quite like narrating her books. On this show, you'll listen to award-winning narration. I'll give myself a pat on the back for that, as well as conversations with actors, writers, and other fascinating people who all share a passionate love for Jane Austen. So please, join me as we embark on a wonderful journey through Jane Austen's work. Be sure to listen and subscribe to the Jane Austen podcast with Alison Larkin, wherever you get your podcasts.